Welcome to this week's episode of Fate of the Union. I am your host, Franklin Shelby. The date of recording of this episode is Wednesday, June 17th, 2020. A little bit of a different episode this week, as we're going to try to put a visual component to this week's podcast episode up on our YouTube channel over at Fate of the Union. So the audio and visual aids that are used and the visual sources of the excerpts of sound will be shown on the YouTube channel, and the normal audio version of the podcast will, of course, be up on the podcast feed over at iTunes and Spotify. If you'll remember from the last few weeks, we covered a few episodes that specifically addressed crime in America insofar as where it's concentrated within, what groups it's concentrated in, and in terms of the crime that police officers respond to on the one end, and the threat that police officers are in when they respond to that crime. A few weeks ago, we went over specifically policing in America in regards to the George Floyd case, the man that was killed by the police in Minnesota about a month ago. And in that episode, when addressing the statistics of police conduct at large, we looked at the Washington Post's interactive database for police shootings. And in 2019, we saw that 235 total black people were shot and killed by the police during that year, but only 9 of those black individuals were unarmed at the time of the shooting. In the year prior, in 2018, those numbers were 229 and 23 respectively. So from there, we were able to glean that the overall threat, insofar as a cause of death and the use of fatal deadly force upon the black community, police officers' use of force is quite scantily used as a method to shoot and kill a black individual, even when taking all the numbers put together. That's, of course, adding both legally justified and legally unjustified crime together. From there, we had another episode in episode 11 covering more specifically crime and race in America and how they interplay with each other. Within that episode, if you'll remember, we looked at violent crime, hate crimes, and the murder statistics. And the murder statistics specifically is going to take a big role in this week's episode. As a quick summary of episode 11, we looked at the percent ratio for violent crime. That's the percent of incidents of intra-race crime divided by percentage of U.S. population of that race. This is meant to show the concentration of intra-race crime within a race. You'll also remember that violent crime, insofar as the statistics are concerned, was murder, rape, and aggravated assault. We saw from there that the percent ratio for violent crime is several times higher in the black community based on the heavy concentration and the high frequency of intra-race crime when compared to other races, that being white, Asian, or what have you. So here in this episode, I wanted to go a little bit further into intra-race crime and go into the main argument that's popularized on the racially motivated left that really is a deflection tactic and meant to diffuse the situation and really get out of addressing the hard numbers and the real problem facing the black community as far as intra-race crime and intra-race murder specifically. So let's get started. Here's a video by Atheism is Unstoppable. That's Devin Tracys over on YouTube. As you can see, I like this video. Devin has really great content, and I've been a fan of his for a while. His episodes in the wake of George Floyd's killing and the protests, rioting, and the advocacy, and really the mainstream media's pushing of complete falsehoods. I think his content's been really good. I think he's even stepped up his usual good work in about the last month or so. So if you haven't already, you should go over and watch this video as well as the last several he's done, and hit subscribe over there as well. So we're going to go into this. This is specifically a YouTuber. I'm not sure of his name, but he really farmed out responses from different Black YouTubers or content creators and getting their either narrative or their feelings on the situation in America as far as race relations and so-called police brutality inflicted upon the Black community. So let's start here, and this will be a good jumping off point for this week's episode.
But then if the first words out of your mouth are, but what about, or like focus on these things instead.
Police brutality is not the thing. So sorry to defund your monopoly on the conversation, but police brutality is a minor, nothing afterthought of a skid mark of a problem. Very minor, just absolutely minor in every way. So don't think that you're going to play the victim if and only when we are to look at a minute parameter within our society and say, oh, from here to here, there's a problem. Okay, well, what about everything else, which is completely related to this? I mean, you cannot complain about being murdered in the streets when your people are doing the lion's share of the murdering. You can't think that that's not going to be brought up.
And there you hear the absolute correct response is that, and this reflects some of the numbers we went over in episode 9. If you look at the number of unarmed Blacks shot and killed by police per year, it represents something like 200 thousandths of a percentage of Black people living in America. That is, even from a fair and an attempted unbiased interpretation of the statistics, a freak occurrence. Anytime you get into the neighborhood of having several zeros after the decimal point when looking at percentages, I think it's fair to say that you are looking at a freak occurrence, an outlier, certainly not something that's reflective of everyday life for that given population.
Secondarily, and the whole point is you call the movement Black Lives Matter and you're ignoring 99% of the death. Bro, that's kind of an important thing. That's why it's brought up. And
there was also a follow-up and a good point raised by Devin that one of the reasons why Black on Black crime is brought up is really a very simple exercise, as we noted in our past episodes, that regardless of the overall threat that police shootings and police killings on the Black community pose, shouldn't a cause of death and a cause of Black murdering, that being other Black people, shouldn't that cause a proportional increase in your fervor, in your advocacy towards stomping that out? Wouldn't it stand to reason that if something is dominating the discussion from your advocacy, but as far as legally unjustified killings is much less, not even really close to 1% of deaths of African Americans per year, once we get up to the astronomical numbers of Black on Black murder, which we'll get into later on in the episode, shouldn't the advocacy and the commentary coming from the group Black Lives Matter be that much stronger? But we know that it's not. We saw in the past episode, we went over Black Lives Matter, the main website. Black on Black crime, or even inner city crime, trying to term the problem aside from intra-race and even just getting the issue out there, it's not mentioned anywhere on the website. Things like LGBT issues and vague concepts of voting fairness and voting rights are mentioned, but this, even as a misnomer, this issue isn't mentioned anywhere on the website. And this isn't to say that this particular YouTuber that Devin's been commenting on, his commentary is not an outlier, of course. We've seen the same kind of shtick being put forth by Michael Eric Dyson. If you don't recall who Michael Eric Dyson is, he's a Black Lives Matter supporter and really a black rights kind of activist. He's the guy you see on a lot of mainstream news media. He likes to use, those big SAT words to cover up the fact that what he's telling you are really either red herrings or really flat out incorrect. But he's been pushing this for a while, and I think that this is reflective of a lot of the so-called or termed academic wing of Black Lives Matter, the professors, the law professors, academics, and they've really started this message that, well, highly concentrated intra-race crime is also present in other races. Yes, of course, it's present in the black community, but because it's present in every race, what's there to see here? This isn't an outlier. And you see this in, we'll look at this article here from cleveland.com. This was posted on June 15th, 2020, so a recent article. And the opening line is, why aren't we talking about black-on-black crime? And this is thrown out here to really take a jab at it. This is not a legitimate question. And then it goes on to say, there are answers to the question, why aren't we talking about black-on-black crime? But critics of Black Lives Matter don't want to hear them. When an opponent of Black Lives Matter talks about blacks killing blacks, it's almost always to deflect attention away from police brutality, as if one issue makes the other more acceptable. But by all means, let's talk about black-on-black crime. You've probably heard a statistic like this before. The majority of black people murdered are killed by other black people. That's true, but also misleading. The overwhelming majority of white murder victims each year are killed by white assailants. So, when's the last time you heard the term white-on-white crime? And this is, again, the two basic straw man arguments put up by the Black Lives Matter left is that black-on-black crime shouldn't be brought up because, A, it's a deflection from the real legitimate topic of the systemic police justified killings of blacks across the country, number one, and number two, intra-race crime in the black community is not an outlier. We've discussed more fully why it's not a distraction from police killings. It's meant as, one, to show that the Black Lives Matter advocacy really is compromised. It's more vengeful than egalitarian. It's looking to flip racial issues on its head. It's not looking to get in a place of equal standing, of equal footing as far as opportunities and rights. It's looking to compromise. It's really just an overcorrection. An overcorrection of a state of affairs in the country that's inaccurately put by its supporters in the first place. So let's tackle first quickly the police violence issue, which we discussed in episode 9. This website, Mapping Police Violence, is certainly a left-leaning website, and it's used as kind of a counter to the Washington Post database. The Washington Post, for its other publications and articles, is certainly not a friend of conservative America, has a really comprehensive database for police shootings in particular. And police shootings are important because, again, in the rare occasion where you get a moment of specificity for what exactly is the problem facing Black America from the police shootings are the moment of specifics you get. But I wanted to show just one quick point here about this website, and I think it's really a bigger issue with the arguments coming from the racial left. And that's this one quick, brief sentence right here. Police killings, as far as mapping police violence is concerned, is, quote, a case where a person dies as a result of being shot, beaten, restrained, intentionally hit by a police vehicle, pepper sprayed, tasered, or otherwise harmed by police officers, whether on duty or off duty, end quote. First, we see that, according to mapping police violence, they do take into account off-duty police officers. But from there, we have to see, was the off-duty police officer acting as simply a civilian trying to protect himself or his home? Or was it an off-duty police officer who was then called into a confrontation? But a bigger issue here is, where in the sentence do you see anything about a determination of probable cause? About whether the person in question has posed a deadly threat to the officers, to the community, whether they're a fleeing felon? It's nowhere to be found, and I think that's what you can call an intentional oversight. Police killing, again, is lumping in, it essentially lumps in the Michael Browns of the world with George Floyd's. A black person was killed by a police officer. End of story, nothing else to see here. But that is, of course, inaccurately depicting the threat, the quote-unquote threat that police officers are posing to the black community. Certainly someone even resisting arrest, like George Floyd, with a past criminal record, but certainly was the subject of an unjustified killing in Minnesota, should not be lumped in with cases like Michael Brown, who tried on several instances in his confrontation with the officer to steal the police officer's weapon, physically assaulted him. Equating these two cases impliedly, not explicitly, sneakily bunching these cases together is something that really should just send off your spidey senses for a misdirection in addressing the problem. And it's interesting, from mapping police violence, you go right to the team that's behind this, and this will shed some light on why we're seeing some inaccurate retelling of the situation and a misreporting of the numbers. DeRay McKesson is the former Senior Director of Human Capital with Minneapolis Public Schools and is a Teach for America alum, having taught 6th grade math in NYC. You'll see here that he got his start in the events of Ferguson, and he's behind a lot of these protest borderline riots. He's been on national television, if not justifying riots and violent uprising, certainly turning a blind eye towards it. Really has shown no interest whatsoever in discussing these issues, insofar as the efforts in the wake of police killings, even regardless of whether they're justified or not, in the further damage they're doing to the black community. I think it's fair to say that DeRay McKesson is, I think he's treated with a little bit more legitimacy and a little bit more academic or institutional prowess than, say, a Sean King. But he's more like an Michael Eric Dyson in terms of how he's respected among the Black Lives Matter activists and supporters than, say, Sean King, but certainly his name stamped on this website and this work really leads you to believe that this is not a mistake, that a lot of this reporting is inaccurate, and you're not really getting the full picture of police response to Black communities if you're not even going to address probable cause of criminality, if you're not even going to address whether or not the suspect in question was posing a deadly threat to the officer or the community. So from there, I wanted to address a couple numbers as far as intra-race crime is concerned. These are 2018 numbers, and as a brief background, I got these numbers from 2018 estimates for the U.S. Census as far as population numbers, and then used 2018 FBI crime stats and UCR reports as far as the percentage of murders, and to help out with the crime rate and the murder percent ratio. Basically, repurposing the numbers to reflect a percent ratio to illustrate the concentration of intra-race murder, similar to the intra-race violent crime percent ratio that we discussed at the beginning of the episode. So according to 2018 numbers, 42.4% of murders were committed by whites, 54.9% of murders were committed by blacks. If you see from these two pie graphs here, of course this is just crudely put to a certain degree, but you see that about 85% of white murders are inflicted upon white victims, and 90 some odd percent of black murders are inflicted upon black victims. However, the reason for the increase in size of the graph on the right is to illustrate how bigger and how more prevalent of an issue it is. Because if you look at the population numbers, in 2018, whites made up about 76.5% of the population, whereas blacks made up 13.4% of the population. Now, how does that affect the numbers in really addressing the gravity of the intra-race murder problem for each race? Well, in the murder crime rate, we looked at the rate of crime as compared to the intra-race crime rate compared to the overall crime rate. And as you can see, the black on black is by order of magnitude bigger, 17.62 to 2.38. We then see the murder percent ratio, and this really tells more accurately the prevalence and really the dire condition that black communities are in. This looks at the intra-race crime, putting the percent of intra-race murders on top of the fraction with the percent of total murders on the bottom of the fraction. And you see the murder percent ratio for whites is 1.11, whereas the murder percent ratio of blacks is 6.94. The two main causes of this are the larger number of murders inflicted upon any race by blacks versus whites, but also even in the higher concentration of intra-race, what with it being 93% to about 85%. We see that the 93 to 85% argument and the dismissal from the Black Lives Matter is really short-sighted, because it's looking at 85% and 93% as comparable, which by a fair estimation it could be. Those are relatively close. But what it's not addressing, and why that argument is misleading, is that what is 85% of what? 93% of what? certainly, and we went over an analogy like this in the last episode, that if you go out to dinner with your friend and he has 85% of his dinner and you eat 93% of your dinner, you said, well, you both ate about the same amount of food. But what did you both have? How big were your meals? Certainly if one person ate a side salad and the other person ate a whole pizza, saying that 85% of your food and 93% of your food is taking in the same amount of calories or taking in the same amount of food is certainly misleading. And that's a rough, broad based analogy to just prove a larger point here, that the 93 to 85% is misleading because the overall larger numbers here is much bigger. And that problem is magnified when looking at intra-race crime and at the fraction of the population that blacks make up when compared to whites. It should also be mentioned that this 13.4% of the population, even of itself, can be carved down and specified more clearly, if you will. I know that, again, AIU has made this point before. I've heard other content creators make it as well, that 13.4% of the population, yes, is the total percentage of blacks in the country, but if you certainly have to discount the elderly, by and large, all black females, and black children. Even though there are more documented cases of murders by black teenagers, we can certainly and reliably cut out black children when really looking at the actual number of offenders, the number of murders within that 13.4%. I would surmise that we're really looking at something more like 3 to 4% of the population. Because again, 13.4 can be roughly halved based on cutting out the female black population. So that leaves you at, 6 and change percent. And then you further have to cut it down for black children and again, the black elderly. So I think a more reliable number is maybe about 4%. I'm sure someone may have a more specific and accurate estimation of the numbers, but I think that's really at least more along the lines of what we're looking at as far as black murders in the country. Finally, I wanted to show one last video. If you haven't seen this before, this is an interview from, as you can see, 4 years ago. Certainly Black Lives Matter had gotten its start already after Ferguson, after the Michael Brown killing. And it was at a time in 2016 when celebrity support was really becoming more chic. And here's a segment from Lil Wayne, a rapper, being interviewed on ABC News and the Nightline program in regards to his thoughts on Black Lives Matter.
And calculating, yet raw.
And our shirts all big and bandanas on and rapping street things and talking about guns. Every verse was about how I would run in your house and tie your parents up or something like that. And I sold over 1 million records in a heartbeat. It was about lyrics. It was just about, it wasn't about what you were talking about, it was about how you was talking about it.
What do you say to people who call your music vulgar, misogynistic, offensive, degrading?
No, if that's what you think about the music, if that's what you categorize it under, then so be it. All those things made me who I am, and I am a very successful man. Please keep looking out for more, because it's coming, baby.
I have to show that first segment because the total disregard for how a lot of members of the public who are not even really fans of his music view his music it's dealt with the kind of seriousness that you would hope for. That people who are that outraged with your music, being upset by your music, is really kind of a wash as far as your success is concerned.
Yeah, but I've never called a certain female a name out. Rude, I don't know. When they meet me, they're like, oh, you so humble or whatever. But I'm from the South.
Member is a diary that at Rikers Island for an illegal weapon possession.
When you look back at prison, has it been life-changing?
I learned a lot about people. You're all on the same level. You're all going through the same thing. Everybody wants.
Thinking that the rest of America didn't seem to understand that Black Lives Matter.
It just sounds weird. I didn't know that you put a name on it. It's not a name. It's not whatever. It's somebody got shot by police for a reason. I am a young, black, rich. If that don't let you know that America understands Black matter these days, I don't know what it is. Don't come at me with that dumb man.
And that is one of my favorite responses to the Black Lives Matter advocacy. And even though we're talking to a guy, Lil Wayne, who's in the rap industry, not a leader of public policy, he touches on an interesting point there, and he more accurately depicts the situation as far as the police threat on the black communities. If you notice, he says if the police shot somebody and then he goes for an effed up reason, then that would be an issue. But the reason, we've seen one of the leading think tanks from the kind of Black Lives Matter left hasn't even delved that far into the situation. They don't even look at the reason and the rationale behind the use of lethal force by police officers in each case. So here we have a guy completely detached, for the most part, from the public conversation, and even him spitting out an interview, being kind of blindsided by the politically motivated questions, can more accurately describe the situation and the lens that it should be looked at. And I think it's also fitting that he says that he's obviously a very wealthy and successful young black man coming from an impoverished and gang-ridden situation that could really has the potential to negatively affect someone as much as any situation could, if you look into his childhood and his younger years getting into the rap industry. But that's a portion of an interview that I like bringing up, because no matter how crudely you want to put it, it still more accurately describes how this situation should be examined by the public. I do want to point out very quickly that, given this is the first YouTube video on my channel, I would like to point out to YouTube and Google that there certainly is transformative content here over ABC's video, contextualizing Lil Wayne's quote, both in the lens of the overall threat that the police pose to the black community, and in justifying his position with further commentary given his upbringing and his childhood. I'm sure going forward this is going to be as many people with obviously a bigger platform than me right now, which is basically everyone on the website, could probably attest to, that I'm sure complaints of this ilk will be very present in our future going forward here. But that wraps it up for the 12th episode of Fate of the Union. Again, this is our first YouTube video, although there are some YouTube videos of just the audio content of previous episodes on our channel. So please keep that in mind as you look at the crude but beginning evolving stages of the video portion of Fate of the Union. And we'll try to improve that going forward. But I think this is a good place to stop this week. Again, if you'd like to follow us for more, you can reach me at Franklin, FOTU at gmail.com, or simply just search Fate of the Union on Medium or Twitter.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Fate of the Union, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.